slightly jokingly, but not entirely jokingly, my theory is that the singularity actually already happened over the period that Britney Spears was locked up, roughly speaking. Um, I don't know that it's connected directly to Britney Spears, but approximately the point where they locked Britney up was also the point when the first iPhone dropped.
Mm-hmm.
And the point where they let her out was also the point where the lockdowns ended.
Mm-hmm.
And between the launch of the propagation of smartphones and the effect of lockdowns in forcing the sort of residual resistant rump of the culture onto the internet, we're now decisively a digital first culture,
Yeah.
certainly across the English speaking world, and I would say probably across most of the so-called developed world and beyond it as well. So that's where we are now, and I think it was. I mean, that we were in the middle of that great upheaval in the 2010s when I said my life became less crazy, and also it wasn't a coincidence that the world also began going crazy over the course of
Mm-hmm.
the singularity. Some really important things started to dissolve very quickly in terms of how we organize information and knowledge and what we think the world is.
This is Jonathan Pedro. Welcome to the Symbolic World. Hello, everyone. I'm here with the very recognizable Mary Harrington. We just had a conversation up not that long ago, and Mary is going to be one of the speakers at the Symbolic World Summit in May, so May 14th to the 16th in Ohio. We'll have obviously links to that down below. And so I thought that, because the theme of our conference is retelling the cosmic epic, there's a way in which we are part of this great story that's happening. And so I thought, for me at least, it'd be an opportunity to find out a little bit more about Mary's story and how it fits into some of the things that are happening. So Mary, thanks for talking to me.
Thank you for having me.
I would think that, how can I say this? I think that like if when you started writing, several years ago, you started kind of to appear on the public, in the public arena, I think people would have been very surprised that I would have invited you to come to something like the Symbolic World Summit with like an Orthodox priest as a speaker and, all of these types of people. But for now, it seems like it's completely natural that you are one of the speakers. You were one of the first ideas that my team had to come speak. And I'm trying to figure out exactly, I mean, I have a sense of what's going on, of why that's the case. Why is it that we're in this moment now? But I'd like to kind of hear it from you. That is, in the past several years, it feels, when I kind of watch you go, it feels like you've changed quite a bit in terms of maybe not your attitude towards life, but at least some of your perspectives. I think the first time I saw you was with an interview with Paul Kingsnorth back in the day with Rebel Wisdom. That was the first time that I saw you. And so, I would like to hear a little bit about, first of all, kind of where you come from, like how you, first of all, came to be a writer. What was motivating you?
I've always made a living from writing, but I kind of did it. I did it in the direction that people don't normally do it in the sense that I did 15 years at the coalface in commercial copywriting, and then accidentally became a journalist. And generally, the trajectory goes the other way. But I'm not completely sure how it happened. When you say how did I become a writer, I think it's probably more accurate to say, I've always it's literally the only thing I've ever been any good at. Like writing, I don't think it's overstating things to say I can taste words. There's something very synesthetic for me about language. It's my happy place. And then the reason I wasn't writing in public before is, I was writing in public before, but either the world wasn't, I don't know, I and the world were too far apart for that really to be a mainstream thing. I wrote crazy stuff. I was kind of crazy. I was pretty unemployable. It's all the sort of classic. In the front covers of books you see like the little autobiography, and then they've been like a fish, a fish gutter and a janitor and a book salesman and just all of these other terrible jobs that they obviously all hated. That was basically me. I sucked at everything I did and just didn't really, like, I worked for money and wrote in my spare time. or blogged or actually increasingly on the internet while I was supposed to be working. I mean, that was me sat at my desk kind of scrolling when I was meant to be working, or compulsively posting on forums or whatever. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
this is not an uncommon phenomenon, but um I, so I mean, in that sense, I always was. It's just that something happened in the late 2010s that made it possible. I don't know if it's that I became more sane by virtue of having settled down. Like by then I was in my 30s and I was a mum, and I was married, and the rest of my life was sufficiently stable that I just wasn't quite as crazy anymore. And I mean, you can do the causality there as whichever way you like. Either I became sufficiently crazy to settle down, or I settled down and therefore became less. I don't know. I don't know which way around it worked, but yeah, somehow those two things came together. And also the world went crazy at the same time. So
Yeah.
we kind of met each other going the other way. But also the internet. I mean, I sort of slightly jokingly, but not entirely jokingly, my theory is that the singularity actually already happened over the period that Britney Spears was locked up, roughly speaking. Um, I'm not. I don't know that it's connected directly to Britney Spears, but approximately the point where they locked Britney up was also the point when the first iPhone dropped.
Mm-hmm.
The point where they let her out was also the point where the lockdowns ended. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and between the launch of the propagation of smartphones and the effect of lockdowns in forcing the sort of residual resistant rump of the culture onto the internet, we're now decisively a digital first culture,
Yeah.
certainly across the English speaking world, and I would say probably across most of the so-called developed world and beyond it as well. So that's where we are now, and I think it was. I mean, that we were in the middle of that great upheaval in the 2010s when I said my life became less crazy, and also I think not. It wasn't a coincidence that the world also began going crazy over the course of
Mm-hmm.
the singularity, because just the kind of some really important things started to dissolve very quickly in terms of how we organize information and knowledge, and what we think the world is. Um, and I just got lucky. Is the rest of the story? I got lucky. My daughter was about 3. I was a stay-at-home mum, and it's when your kid gets to about 3, they don't need you quite as intensely, so you have a bit more time. Um, and I mean, there was a lot going on politically, and I was a real news junkie. And I remember thinking, why shouldn't it be me? There's all of these people publishing opinions on the internet. I mean, I'm not short of those. Why shouldn't I? I've always been okay at writing. I should have a go, and I did. And I literally, that's just all that happened. I wrote a couple of pieces, and then Unheard got in touch with me to say, "Oh, do you want to pitch?" And I did. And I think about 3 columns later, they offered me a contract. And literally, that was just sheer chance. They happened to be getting going at a point where so was I. And we got on. Unheard's been home for me as a writer ever since, and everything else just fell out the back of that. It turns out that I really like writing, and people like publishing me, so here I still am.
Hmm.
And I mean, your opener was sort of some. What I'm hearing from you is Mary's views have evolved considerably, or Mary as an internet persona has evolved considerably over the course of those 8 years. And I think that's true, but I don't feel like my basic worldview has altered very
Yeah.
much. It's more that as we get further into whatever the flip this is that's going on, things become easier to talk about because they're more part of everybody's familiar reality that
Mm.
just weren't very obvious to people before. And one of those things is what is the like what one of my current interests, which is, what do memes mean? I mean, this is something that we talked about in our last conversation over at Socrates Dialogues. What is the meaning of memes? What does it mean? What's actually going on there? And this is, but I mean, but for me, that maps. Like this is not a new interest. This is a long-standing one. I was completely obsessed back in the aughts with the meaning of wikis and the social implications of wikis, and the what how because my undergraduate degree and my great love was English literature. And I was lucky to get a fairly solid grounding in canonical English literature, pretty much from Beowulf to 1945 or so. Um, and I was just really, I was fascinated when I first met the internet because it felt so fundamentally part of that story, and in ways which were radically new but also radically old. And so this is all stuff that I've been thinking about for at least 20 years.
Hmm.
It's more if I'm talking more explicitly and more publicly about it now, it's simply that uh, we have more of a common language for doing that because more people are trying to figure out what on earth just happened.
Hmm.
It's not just the preserve of crazies and occultists and religious eccentrics and people in cupboards full of books anymore. It's everybody's problem, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I mean, this is kind of what this is your.
Oh yeah,
And I think this is how you end up with Mary in conversation with Jonathan Pageau, because this is kind of your project as well.
yeah, definitely. And I think when you say that the singularity happened, already, I'm curious, what is it that you mean? What is it that you mean by that? Do you mean this fusion, let's say, between the human world and the digital world? Is that what you mean by the singularity?
Okay, so I mean there are competing even within the nerdosphere, there are competing definitions of what we mean by singularity. And like this is it's kind of boring, it's like fine gradations of late Thomistic philosophy. It's like you really can get into the weeds, but it's kind of boring. Uh, so let's not go there. But and I have a slightly kind of cheeky definition of singularity. I mean, the broadest sense, it means the point at which we merge with our own technologies,
Okay, yeah,
such that we can no longer understand such that we go through a transformation in consciousness and can no longer comprehend that we can't comprehend from where we are now, and
yeah,
such that we will no longer comprehend our previous selves from having gone through the looking glass.
yeah, yeah.
And my
Okay,
okay,
that's what I
so
thought.
this so this
That's
is
kind
a
of what I thought that you
so
meant.
I'm trying to be sort of tech agnostic about this. And I mean, in the sort of tech sphere, what's generally being referred to is something where it's imagined that we're able to rewrite our bodies or our embodiment, or our capacity to think, or extend consciousness throughout the cosmos, and rewrite the basic building blocks of reality using computers and various kind of fanciful things like that. But it sort of cashes out as various kind of tech optimist versions of the rapture, right?
That's hilarious. Yeah, exactly.
Like
Uh,
it has a very millenarian flavor.
yeah,
We'll be taken up into this new world, and nothing that comes after will be imaginable.
yeah. But I think, I mean, my sense is that both of us, I think also in terms of politics, that's one of the reasons why I think that we're able to discuss is also we have a neither doomer vision of, let's say, the technology, but definitely not a kind of ideological idea or like a futurist notion of what's happening. So there's a sense in which we realize this is where we are. Like we also can't totally go back.
That's right.
It's very difficult to disconnect from this world. I mean, you can, but
That's right.
then if you do, then you'll have no influence over it.
That's
And
right.
so
That's right.
so
And I
how
mean, it
to
would be.
navigate this position, like how to navigate this place where we both like
Yeah,
say,
yeah, yeah.
okay, hold on to your children, like hug your kids, get that you need that human connection, go to church, participate in the world, but also it doesn't mean that we have to totally disconnect from this other world.
Marshall McLuhan's advice was pray and pay attention, which I think is actually very deep. We
Yeah.
could talk about just that sentence probably for an hour or two. Maybe we'll come back to it. But yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it would be kind of ironic for me to be posting paid articles on Substack complaining about the technology which is allowing me to do that. Right. I mean, you can, but there's a sort of, there's a layer of reflexivity there, which is sort of, it's best to, like, technologies are not neutral, but there are as many upsides to the digital ones as there are potential negatives. I mean, for example, it's inconceivable, or very much more difficult to conceive that you and I would be having this conversation. Here we are, many thousands of miles apart. I think,
Yeah.
I think we're many thousands of miles apart right now. Certainly we're in very different time zones as we have this conversation, and that itself is a remarkable phenomenon, which is essentially made possible by this digital revolution. So while I have many It's a very two-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
And it dissolves a lot of things that we take for granted, some of which are really nice. I think it's not unambiguously a bad thing. It's just definitely not a neutral one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the
One of
meaning
the
of
things
it is
for
not
sure.
exhausted by the things you can do with it.
One of the things for sure, I think that what you pointed to is right, is that there's something about the liquefaction of these relationship where everything, all of these natural connections that we have, let's say in our families, our communities, are dissolving. Uh, but what it does is that it also surprisingly creates the types of networks that could not have been possible before, and that's why you end up having these weird connections where I can talk to a neuroscientist, or I can talk to a philosopher, or I can talk to an artist, and for some reason people are willing to entertain those conversations, that people are interested in hearing how there's cross pollination. Let's say up to the war, let's say, or even after the war, this kind of hyper specialization was what was leading us. And then in this moment, it feels like that specialization is becoming weaker. And so there's a possibility of a new, like a new renaissance or something that brings everything together. I said I would never do it again, but here we are. We are announcing the Symbolic World Summit in May 2026. I have so many great people around me that I'm just excited to do it, even though I thought it would be crazy to do it again.
Our summit's going to be from May 14th through 16th in Broadview Heights, Ohio. You can buy tickets at symbolicworldsummit.com. We have early bird pricing going right now, $50 off of general admission and VIP tickets. Keynote speakers this year are Father Josiah Trenum and Dr. Mary Harrington, which is a combination nobody knew that they wanted, but I think is going to be absolutely incredible. And of course, Jonathan and I will be speaking as well as several people from around the Symbolic World community.
A lot of people that you like, that you've seen, are going to be there, are going to come. We're going to have book signings. It'll be a lot of time for people to meet and to greet. We're also doing Supra as well. And so come and join us. We can't wait for this, and we're excited to meet you in person.
Yeah, a different way of framing that, one that I was actually thinking about earlier today. So Walter Ong, who's a Jesuit literary scholar, I think he died quite recently, but he wrote in the latter half of the 20th century about the transition from orality, which is to say spoken word cultures, to literacy, and wrote a very influential study on how transformative that is at the level of culture and consciousness and social organization. Huge number of other things like that. And one of the points he makes, almost in passing, and doesn't really follow it up in this book, Orality and Literacy, is that the printing press was the first template, was the original template of the industrial process as such, in that it breaks up words into their constituent. I mean, the alphabet breaks up words into sounds, but the printing press made those sounds into little physical objects, which you then arrange within a frame, and then you use that to in a sort of duplicative process, which is in turn organized within a social assembly line process.
Yeah.
And that then become 200 years before the Industrial Revolution proper, that template was there in Gutenberg's printing press, which just blew my mind as a thought. To think that this was actually just how revolutionary that was as a concept. And then when you think about it, I think this point has been elaborated by a couple of others at different. That template, that industrial process, then becomes the template for reality itself. People. So a few hundred years later, people are thinking of reality as something, as little balls that are assembled in different patterns, and which you can rearrange, with enough technicity and enough skill and enough precision. Tools.
Yeah, even people are that.
Yeah,
they're
and
economic
you can
agents, and you can move
yes,
around, and doesn't matter.
yes. And I was thinking, so what does it? So if that template for manufacturing has become a sort of generalized template for industrial society as such, what does it do to our anthropologies and our social organizations to have come out the other side of it? Because we no longer live in a world that's organized according to the template of print and industrial assembly lines. I mean, the West deindustrialized some decades ago, and we're kind of deindustrializing. We've come all the way to the end of that arc, in the sense that we're not now decisively deindustrialized or post-industrialized the word. In that, print isn't the primary medium anymore. But this is not to say that we've come out in precisely the pre-modern world. We've come out somewhere new. I mean, AI is definitely not a pre-modern world. It's something altogether new, and that's the sort of, and what the meaning of AI is in the Marshall McLuhan sense as a technology is something which, I think about a lot. I haven't come to any particularly snappy conclusions yet.
Yeah,
but it seems to me that the anthropological and the social implications of embracing that as a template for the word are immense and not nearly sufficiently well explored yet.
Well, for sure, I think that the AI seems to be the prophecy, McLuhan's prophecy about this kind of electric nervous system, and how it would basically join together into a kind of cosmic brain, or all of humanity would be joined together into this brain. Seems that AI is doing that, because AI, the only way they were able to make AI work is to farm intelligence. It's like the opposite of the Matrix, where in the Matrix they're farming your bio energy, but in AI they're actually farming your qualia, like your capacity to judge good from bad. And so humans are training the AI, but it's basically humans that are telling the AI what is good and bad, and then it coalesces into these giant brains. But we have to also remember that McLuhan, when he was predicting that, was saying that that's the Antichrist. he wasn't, people always think McLuhan is some futurist and some hip futurist, but no, McLuhan was like a traditional Catholic, and he was saying, pay attention to this, like you said, as humanity kind of fuses together towards this giant brain, there's a very large chance that this is going to be the nervous system of the Antichrist, and so, even as a writer, how do you? I mean, it'd be interesting to know how you use AI actually. Like, in what way do you use it, and what way do you refuse to use it, for example?
I do and I don't. That's an interesting question. I don't use it to write my sentences, because I like writing sentences. I treat it as a tool. Like, it's not thinking for me. It's an extension of thought. It's very good at, given sufficiently clear parameters, it's very good at large scale pattern recognition, or if you want it to, you can use it to do a sort of preliminary literature search, for example.
Yeah.
What are the 5 most important texts on blah, and summarize them for me. You won't, asking the AI to summarize it for you is different in kind from reading it and then drawing out, whatever it prompts, whatever that experience of reading would prompt or elicit from your existing patterns of thought and mentally stored reflections and so on. It's a very different thing. But there's only so many hours in the day, and if you really just need, if you just need like the 2-page summary of what so and so said, it's okay, but you have to, as long as you remember that it's not thinking, it doesn't really know what you need, and you really do need to check its work, because it does frequently make things up. And with all of those provisos, you can use it as a research assistant. Like it's kind of, well, I mean, it's a robot. As long as you remember that it's a robot,
that's how
you have a robot. You have
a
robot research assistant, and I think that's like, I use a car. I don't insist on walking everywhere, and I think that's sort of, and as long as you remember that it's an extension, not a substitute, I think that's licit. And we also use it in our family for language learning. There are very, very successful and popular language learning apps. Like, I'm not able to teach my daughter Italian, but she wants to learn Italian. She's doing pretty well at learning Italian. This is, and again, there comes, provided that's oriented towards real human IRL interactions with Italian speakers. I feel like that's a licit extension of what we'd be able to offer educationally. Where I think you get into sort of category error with this stuff is where you confuse it, where you forget that it's not sentient, or you treat it as as a substitute for the judgment or wise counsel or relationality or human intimacy. All of those things, it's okay at synthesizing under certain circumstances, but it can go hideously wrong, and ultimately it's not sentient. So that's sort of like mistaking your hat for the cat. At the end of the day, it really is just a hat.
Yeah, definitely. And so I want to come back a little bit to my original idea of what I wanted to ask you. And so let's say in the past, since you started writing publicly and you've kind of appeared on the public, a lot of things have changed in the culture. A lot of things have changed politically. A lot of things have how has your own personal story or your own personal thought, how has it tracked with the world changing, or how has it resisted, or how have you seen the relationship between the changes in your own life and the things that are happening around us?
Again, that's a really interesting one. I mean, it's one I think about a lot, in the sense that I'm a creature of books, but I'm also a creature of the internet. Like, I'm not quite net native. I think I was 18, or maybe even 18 or 19 before I got my first email address. So I grew up in a world entirely without that sort of digital otherworld. But I love the digital otherworld. In the same way that somebody who's moved to a foreign country and naturalized and just loves the local festivals and food and joins in with all of the stuff, but isn't quite they weren't born there. That's kind of me on the internet. And I'll always internet with a book person's accent, even if it's very slight. I can always spot people of my exact generation online in their posting style, because they all post with the same accent, very slight foreign accent. Like Zoomers on the other hand, they have no accent at all because they just grew up there.
Yeah, they grew up online. It's a completely different thing.
Yeah, they grew up online, and it's a completely different sensibility. But my generation, which is to say mid-40s, so the internet with a slight accent, and once you're attuned to it, it's unmistakable, and I can spot those guys even if they just have some random picture as their profile.
Right. Even if you don't know their name, you can picture.
Yeah, even if I don't know their name, I'm like, you're within 5 years of my age. I just know, and then eventually, and when I get an opportunity to ask, I'm always right. But anyway, I mean, that's a slight sidebar. How has this is a really roundabout way of saying, what's going on the internet is part of what it means to be me. In the sense of being an extension of myself. Internet discourses, inhabit me to the same extent as I inhabit internet discourses. I try and moderate that a bit these days, because it's all got very much more cynical and sometimes really adversarial there. But there's a sense, I really enjoy that sense of wandering the byways of the internet, and the serendipity that can occur there, and the other humans the other people you can meet there, and some of I have extraordinary friendships that couldn't have come about without just noodling around there and seeing what would turn up. I love the internet, but platforms don't last. They seem to have so far they seem to have a sort of a natural lifespan, and after that they just start to suck. Facebook was great for a while. Facebook just began to suck, and it sort of happens by degrees, and everyone's like, oh, what's going on? And then after a while you're like, oh, man, I just can't do this anymore. This is just beginning to suck.
Yeah.
And then you just, you're sort of, you feel a bit bereft, but what are you going to do? It sucks. It's just not doing the thing anymore. And I think there was a period from maybe 2015 to 2024 or 25, a 10-year period where Twitter was the thing. Twitter, now X, but it isn't anymore, and I really miss it. And those in the course of that arc, subcultures have come and gone. Some very influential ones. I mean, Donald Trump would not be in the White House without some of those subcultures. A great many other, second and third order consequences have fallen out of that. But the subculture that propelled Donald Trump to the White House twice, more or less emerged out of Twitter. I mean, there are sort of there are subterranean channels that fed into Twitter.
There's 4chan
and there was 4chan and a bunch of other little, not so little even. There are other tributary rivers that fell into that fed into the great stream of Twitter. But it was Twitter really. And that's over now. In my, and I couldn't even give you a clear intellectual reason. It's just you feel it. It's Twitter is going the way, the way of all platforms. And I don't know what comes next. I don't even know if what comes next is a written form at all. It might just be primarily short form video, at which point I'm totally stuck because I'm a creature of text. And I honestly don't know what happens to me at that point. I'm a bit kind of horrified by having even to think about it. But I don't know. I mean, this is a slightly kind of backwards way of talking about, the political subcultures that have come and gone over the last 10 years. But I think the one in which I was probably the most involved was the Twitter counterculture, which has very much taken its place, in the public sphere now. And has, in the process, as is always the way with these things, has sort of lost its countercultural cachet. Most of the really funny anons are now just like their faces in the media.
Yeah, which is hard sometimes to believe. Some of them.
I know. So, and some of those people have parlayed it into quite influential face posting media careers. Yeah. And I mean, I was an anon for a while.
Really? Oh, really?
Yeah, no, know that. Until between 2015 and 2019, maybe I was anon on Twitter. Now I wasn't like a frog. I wasn't really part of that culture, but no, I was anon. Yeah. I was just I mean, it was the same avatar that I have now.
We're probably on a hinge. Like I'm 50, you're 45, right? And for me, the idea of being anon is just I can't. Like I was never really. I think at the beginning of the internet, for a few years, I was anon on the like Yahoo groups. This is a while ago, 2002, 2003. Actually, like fighting Duganites, which like really down in the let's say the underculture of some of those internet things. But for a very long time, I've always used my name and my face. I don't know why, but it just seems natural to do that. Well,
yeah. When you think about English speaking internet subcultures, functionally what you're talking about is the American the America led internet empire. Because English, like because of the deterritorializing effect of the internet, all Anglosphere internet discourse is functionally the same thing, which means effectively no matter where you live, whether it's I believe you're in Canada, is that right?
Yeah.
And I'm in the British Isles. But we all speak English, which means that we just get sort of absorbed into the American Borg because there's just more Americans and they're really loud.
They have a lot of
money.
Too.
They have a lot, right. And I say this without rancor. It's just it's just an effect of relative power and all also being in the words of 1066 and all that top nation. Like it just is what it is, right? Yeah. So when I think about the sort of phases of internet subculture that I've been an active participant in, particularly since I stopped being a non, it begins with the Trump presidency in 2016, and that was kind of chaotic. And I wasn't really a commentator then. And I think my kind of my face doxing, I think they call it, roughly coincided with the end of the Trump presidency, the beginning of COVID and the election of Joe Biden.
Okay, really? And then there was late. I thought it was earlier.
Yeah, it was 2019. I think I stopped being. And early in the lockdowns, I turned up on an unheard video, at which point my face is in the public domain, and it's this is what it is. But then there was this really for somebody who likes for a critic, and it's easy to be a critic and it's fun to be a critic. There was a very fruitful period where there was just lots to poke fun at. There was this very sort of oppressive, climate of left-wing moral censoriousness, and there were just these crazy crackers policies, and men pretending to be women, and just all sorts of crazy things going on. And there was just lots to like. There was a lot of very low hanging fruit, and a lot of very easy targets,
Yeah.
and a lot of just so transparently bonkers stuff that
Yeah.
it was just very fun and very easy. And things are now very much more ambiguous.
Yeah.
And I feel like I don't like doing hot takes anymore because things are just very often not what they seem on
Yeah.
the first take. And I'm often reluctant to go off the cuff because you just need a little bit more information. And also, at the risk of sounding paranoid, such engines of propaganda as exist online are very much more sophisticated now and very much more methodical and very much more organized and very much more effective. And it's just, I like, I can't always see it. Sometimes you can sort of smell it, but if you go off kind of half cocked, then before your article has been up for 6 hours, you realize you've been played, and that's just a really annoying feeling.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
and I think especially since the beginning of the Ukraine war, then obviously the war in Gaza, and now it's like the propaganda is
that's right.
so present
intense.
and so sophisticated and so intense that that's why one of the reasons why I don't talk about politics too much is that I honestly don't believe I know what's going on. Now with Epstein, the same problem. So it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
But that's also the problem of it's the problem of these algorithms that we don't really know who holds the key to the algorithm and who gets things in front of you and doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. And so I've become more and more but ironically, the more high profile I've become, the more reluctant I've become to use that, as a sort of talking head on things which I'm not completely sure I know what I'm talking. Yeah, and I mean, it's also just a really easy temptation to fall into, you sort of being a rent-a-gob on anything, and people want you to come on and spout about this or that you don't actually know very much about, and it's easy to cobble together some kind of an opinion, but it just feels very chaotic and very confusing, and very, very much more curated in a kind of I don't want to say a sinister way, but in a very intentional way. And I can't always see who's doing the curating and why.
Yeah.
And I think under those circumstances, it's just wiser to keep it 3/4 buttoned.
Yeah. And so, what then is exciting you? Like, what is drawing your attention? What did you feel like it's worth getting engaged in or talking about right now?
I mean, I've finally got the opportunity to pursue a theme which has interested me pretty much since I left university, or even before, which is trying to find an answer to the question, if the printing press was if the printing press was really the engine that drove modernity, then what does it mean to go out the other side of print and into this new thing? And I remember it struck me very forcefully. Pretty much the moment I first met the internet properly. That was we were in the foothills of something very new. And at the moment, I'm writing a book, ironically, perhaps, about the end of the print era and what it means. What it means to try and think after the singularity, or after the latest singularity. I think it's about my thesis is actually this is the third. The second was the printing press, and the first was the alphabet.
Okay.
So in fact, we've merged with our information technologies before. And I guess this is of a piece with not wanting to be a doomer about technology, or not wanting to be unambiguously a doomer about technology. This really isn't our first rodeo. But the last one was pretty disruptive.
A lot of war came out of the printing press.
I mean, and I'd like what exactly has been happening since there's war in Ukraine, there's war in Iran now as well. There's been some stuff. There's a certain amount of war is indeed I don't know if it's a reach yet to draw any sort of direct causal links, but I suppose the links were quite indirect. I mean,
everybody's talking about multipolarity, everybody's talking about it in different ways, and so this, when you talk about the industrial process and this kind of rational capacity to take words and make them into little bits that you move around, and you have this kind of top-down control over what gets seen, what gets published, what gets distributed. And this has been the world we've lived in until, let's say, the internet, even in terms of television, in terms of, it was all this very, very direct monocultures that we were kind of engaged
I would
in.
actually, I'd modify that very slightly, in the sense that I actually think the end of the industrial era proper was the end of the two world wars. Because I mean, if you think about the two world wars, in a sense that was it was the ultimate sort of apotheosis in a really dark way of industrial manufacturing. Like the whole, every nation, every country that was drawn into that war ended up conscripting basically their entire population into an extended, incredibly complicated industrial process, all of which was geared towards killing the other guy. And that was just true everywhere, for every country. It was either the war effort at home, or it was munitions making, or it was digging for victory, or it was actually doing the fighting. And it was all industrialized, it was all highly mechanized, and it was all geared towards killing the other guy. And after, the cataclysm was so total that people were like, we're not doing that again. And I also don't think it's a coincidence that you come out the other side of 1945 and you're in the era of TV and radio, which are, Carl Schmitt noticed actually not long into that era that this was already something new, and it wasn't really democratic in the classical sense at all anymore. In a sense, it had degraded the idea of electorates to something more like entertainment. Democratic debate has sort of degraded to something more like entertainment. So you have something of, in the TV and radio era, you have, Marshall McLuhan in the 1960s is on about how he thinks, electric simultaneity is already creating this sort of post-print consciousness, which is very much more emotivist and tribal. But the form of TV and radio is still one to many. It's still very top down, and it's still very centralized and controlled. So I think our political forms maintain something that looked a lot like the industrial order for much longer, because our media was still very centralized. And that's just the internet just threw a stone through that. And so now we have electric simultaneity, but we no longer have the centralization, and the results are just everywhere. They're there in people's consciousness, they're there in our politics, and they're there in our individual relational lives as well. The cracks are just they're just fractal.
Like all of the alliances are up in the air. Like nobody really knows exactly what those alliances are anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, people like to freak out about cancel culture. I was thinking about this earlier today, but I was thinking, what if actually cancel culture is not a leftist thing at all, but it's just an effect of the internet and the way people organize. And it seems to me that actually the reason everyone assumed it was a left wing thing is simply because left wing communities got online sooner. They were earlier adopters of the internet. And now that everybody's,
because the right wing people, they were the resistance at that point in that culture. But now that things are not as clear, we see all the cancel culture memes, being applied on the right. I mean, the way that how people are talking about Tucker or Candace, all these people, it's like you have to get rid of them. Like they have to stop speaking. And this is just, and maybe it's just, so I think that you're right, that it's mostly the problem of everybody being able to say everything, and that has effects. So people fall to cancel culture.
Yeah. And it takes this incredibly feminine form, because it is structurally a very feminine mode of interaction. In the sense, I mean, this is possibly a sidebar. People like to go on about the feminization of everything, and I always think that's an incomplete analysis unless you're looking at it through the lens of material conditions and technology as well. And I mean, if you think about the way like classically, one of the differences between men and women comes out in the way they manage conflict. In that men are much more likely to come to blows physically, but they're also much more likely to form in groups and compete against out groups. This is the sort of Evo Psych story of men's sociality and conflict model, whereas women are much more on the surface conciliatory, and they're much more cooperative, and they're much more collaborative. Because the evolutionary pressures are different. and we're also physically weaker. But what that also produces a different mode of conflict, in that when women fight, it tends not to be so overt. You know, we won't come to physical blows so often. And what conflict tends to look like more is covert forms of hostility. You know,
Yeah.
whispering campaigns,
Yeah.
or
Reputation damaging.
yeah, reputation damaging whisper campaigns, character assassination, you know, ganging up on the other person, expelling somebody from the in-group. And if you think about how the internet works, you know, it incentivizes endless talking and it forecloses physical violence just structurally. Like,
Yeah.
you know, obviously I don't want to hit you, but even if I did want to hit you, you're several thousand miles away in Canada. So like, what am I going to do?
That's right.
So instead, what am I, you know, I'm forced into this classically, you know, offline at least, much more feminine mode. You know, if I wanted to, you know, come at you, which, you know, to be clear, I don't. But you know, if I want to come at somebody on the internet, I have to do it through characters
Yeah.
assassination and smear and whisper campaigns, and you know, all of, and what, you know, when people say that woke and cancel culture are feminine, and therefore obviously it's an effect of too many women in public life, they have the causality completely backwards. And actually, I think what we're looking at is a mode of communication which forces everybody into these much more feminine modes, even of hostility, irrespective of sex, and then blaming it all on men, which seems to, yeah. I mean, if you've ever seen a bunch of right wing male anons do a purity spiral, my God, it's like a sixth form girls school common room. You know, the idea that this is somehow uniquely a female, it's not. It's an effect of the technology.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
and you know,
super.
and perhaps that draws out, you know, different aspects of our you know, sort of sexed natures in different ways. But the technology, the effect of the technology as a form is incredibly powerful as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Definitely, I mean, there's probably a correlation between all of those aspects too. You know, it's like
That's
so
right.
we don't have a lot of time, but I want to ask you one last thing, which is, you know, you are going to come speak with us at Symbolic World Summit, and your subject is very interesting. So I would like you to give us like just a little taste or a little preview of what it is that you want to talk about with us.
I want to talk about rebuilding the monasteries, and I actually don't know. I'm not going to know until I prepare the talk. No, I know thematically like what the zone is that I want to, but I don't know yet to what extent I mean that literally and to what extent I mean that figuratively. But I want to talk about the role that the monasteries played after the fall of Rome and before the modern year, in the middle bit, in if you preserving and stewarding and keeping alive the flame of intellectual and scholarly life within European cultures, which was, I mean, it was absolutely essential. And I want to talk about the relationship that fostered between the kind of things, the kind of knowledge that was preserved, and the means of preserving it, which means I want to talk about the resacralization of knowledge. And I don't know. I don't know if that necessarily has to be literal or figurative. I don't know if you need to actually live in a physical monastery to do that or not. I mean, this is kind of an open question for me. I also want to talk about practices of memory, which is just a huge area of interest for me, because this was so central to medieval scholarly cultures. Just because books were rare, you maybe only you'd get one go on a book in your lifetime, and if you wanted to remember its contents, you really had to remember it. And there were very methodical practices that entailed, which were extremely highly developed and were just taught as a matter of course, you know, to anybody who was like table stakes was learning the entire book of Psalms, you know, which is sort of inconceivable from 500 years into print culture and now digital one. And so I want you know, what does it mean to what does it mean to encode and transmit the material that we consider important through practices of memory within a context that sees the preservation and the transmission of knowledge as inseparable from sacred life. And what does it mean to have, you know, what were the implications of losing that, you know, very briefly, and then what does it mean to have come out the other side of print culture to a point where we're losing our paper-based literary cultures because everybody just scrolls now, but we haven't yet reclaimed practices of memory such as to be intentionally constructing interior what they would have called treasure houses. A thesaurus is a Latin word for treasure house. And it's given us our word for a printed dictionary of words. But the interim stage between thesaurus as a physical treasure house and thesaurus as a book containing verbal definitions was a practice of memory, which understood the storing of important words and sentences and ideas as a kind of storing up of treasure. And we don't have that anymore, and I think we're going to need it. Especially if AI is going to promise to do all of our thinking for us and do all of our writing for us. I mean, what does that even leave us with? And I would, that I think the dangers are great, but it also opens space for a very much more intentional practice of memory, and perhaps opens space for a kind of resacralization of knowledge. So that's kind of it, I think, in a nutshell. But I've got a few chapters to write between now and then, so it'll probably, it might
change.
But that's it, somewhere in that zone, I think.
That's wonderful. It makes me think of really. I keep visiting Phaedrus again, and Socrates' argument about writing and how writing will reduce memory, because
he was kind of a doomer, but as it turns out, he wasn't wrong. He was just 2,000 years out on his timeline.
Yeah, well, he wasn't wrong, but it's like he could see a process starting that would end in what we have now, which now no one can deny that.
Yep.
One of the things that the internet has done is that it's completely externalized memory, and so you don't actually have to remember anything. You just have to go and get it online, and AI has made it even worse. So I think that subject is going to be really interesting. I can't wait to hear what it is that you have to say. And so Mary, thanks for talking to me, and I can't wait to see you in a few months.
It's been such a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to the conference, and thank you for having me.